Greenwich Palace, 1558. The bells of England toll for the death of Queen Mary, while courtiers whisper about her half-sister's fate. She is Elizabeth Tudor, bastard daughter of the executed Anne Boleyn, and today she becomes Queen of England at 25. But her crown comes with impossible choices: marry and lose power to a husband, or remain single and risk the dynasty. She will choose a third option that defies every expectation of womanhood and monarchy in the 16th century. Elizabeth will become the Virgin Queen, using her marriage prospects as political weapons while sacrificing personal happiness for England. For 45 years, she will play the most dangerous game in Europe, keeping suitors hopeful while nations desperate for alliance. This is the story of the woman who turned her greatest weakness into her ultimate strength and changed the world forever. Elizabeth's path to power was paved with blood and betrayal, beginning with her mother's execution when she was barely 2 years old. The daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth became queen aged 25, at a time of political crisis. Her father had destroyed the Catholic Church in England to marry her mother, then beheaded Anne on charges of adultery and treason. Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, stripped of her succession rights, and raised knowing that royal blood offered no protection from the executioner's axe. Her childhood was a masterclass in survival as she navigated the treacherous waters of Henry's court, watching stepmothers rise and fall. She learned to speak 6 languages, studied classical literature, and absorbed the harsh lesson that knowledge was the only reliable weapon. When her Catholic half-sister Mary became queen in 1553, Elizabeth faced constant suspicion and the very real threat of execution. Mary's persecution of Protestants earned her the name Bloody Mary, and Elizabeth knew her Protestant faith made her a target. She survived by appearing to convert to Catholicism while secretly maintaining Protestant beliefs, perfecting the art of deception that would define her reign. Elizabeth I began her reign on November 17, 1558, as a young woman of only 25 years of age. The crown she inherited was bankrupted by war, the nation was religiously divided, and foreign powers circled like vultures waiting to intervene. Early on in her reign, Queen Elizabeth I proclaimed that she would not marry because she was already bound unto a husband, which is the Kingdom of England. But this declaration masked a far more complex and calculated strategy that would define European politics for decades to come. The marriage game began immediately as European princes lined up to court the young queen, each representing different political alliances. Philip II of Spain, her former brother-in-law, proposed first, offering to continue the Catholic alliance that had defined her sister's reign. But Elizabeth had no intention of returning England to papal authority or Spanish domination, despite the diplomatic advantages such a marriage might bring. Other suitors for Elizabeth's hand included the Archduke Charles of Austria and the future King Henry III of France. Each proposal was carefully considered, prolonged through diplomatic negotiations, and ultimately declined with just enough hope to maintain the relationship. She understood that her unmarried status was her greatest diplomatic asset, allowing her to play European powers against each other endlessly. But the most dangerous relationship was closest to home, with Robert Dudley, the man who may have been the love of her life. Robert Dudley rushed to join the new queen at Hatfield House and was soon appointed as Master of Horse, one of the most important positions. Handsome, ambitious, and utterly devoted to Elizabeth, Dudley had shared her childhood and understood her better than any foreign prince ever could. The story of Queen Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley has fascinated people for more than 450 years. They were certainly emotionally dependent on each other. Their relationship scandalized the court as Elizabeth showed him unprecedented favor, spending hours in private conversation and appearing genuinely in love. But Dudley was married to Amy Robsart, making any romantic relationship impossible without destroying Elizabeth's reputation and legitimacy as queen. When Amy Robsart died mysteriously in 1560, falling downstairs at Cumnor Place, rumors immediately spread that Dudley had murdered her. The scandal threatened to destroy Elizabeth's reign before it had truly begun, as enemies whispered that she had conspired in the murder. Elizabeth was forced to distance herself from Dudley publicly while privately grieving the loss of her chance for personal happiness. She had learned the cruelest lesson of monarchy, that a queen's heart belonged to her kingdom, not to herself. The pressure to marry intensified as Parliament and her councillors warned that England needed an heir to prevent civil war after her death. With no child to succeed her and no recognized heir, Elizabeth faced dangers at home and from abroad. Mary, Queen of Scots, her Catholic cousin, represented the greatest threat, as many Catholics considered her the rightful Queen of England. Elizabeth I wanted Mary to marry a Protestant and proposed the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley. Neither Mary nor Dudley wished the match. The relationship between the two queens became a deadly chess game, with Elizabeth keeping Mary under house arrest while navigating the political implications. Each decision Elizabeth made about marriage carried life or death consequences, not just for herself, but for the religious and political future of England. She perfected the art of diplomatic delay, allowing suitors to believe they had a chance while never quite committing to any arrangement. The Duke of Anjou became her most persistent suitor in the 1570s, representing a potential French alliance against Spanish power. Their courtship lasted for years, with Elizabeth appearing to seriously consider marriage even as she approached an age where childbearing became increasingly unlikely. She allowed him to court her publicly, accepted his gifts, and even appeared to enjoy his company, all while never intending to marry. The performance was so convincing that even her closest advisors believed she might finally choose a husband and secure the succession. But Elizabeth understood that marriage would fundamentally alter the balance of power, potentially reducing her from queen regnant to queen consort. Any husband would expect to rule alongside her, making decisions about war, religion, and governance that she had fought to control independently. She had watched other queens become figureheads in their own kingdoms, their authority transferred to husbands who ruled in their names. The Spanish Armada in 1588 proved that her strategy of diplomatic marriage negotiations had successfully prevented foreign invasion for 30 years. By keeping multiple suitors hopeful, she had prevented any single European power from feeling completely rejected and turning to open warfare. Her famous speech at Tilbury before the Armada's arrival revealed the full extent of her identification with England itself. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." The Armada's defeat established Elizabeth as one of Europe's most formidable monarchs, proving that her unmarried status had strengthened rather than weakened England. After 18.5 years in captivity, Mary was found guilty of plotting to assassinate Elizabeth in 1586 and was beheaded the following year. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, was Elizabeth's most agonizing decision, knowing it would eliminate her greatest rival while creating a martyr. Burghley and his fellow councillors issued the warrant without the Queen's knowledge, and Mary was executed on 8 February. Elizabeth's fury at her councillors masked her relief that the decision had been taken from her hands, allowing her to maintain plausible deniability. As she aged, the question of succession became more urgent, with Parliament pressing her to name an heir to prevent chaos after her death. She refused to designate a successor, understanding that naming an heir would immediately make her dispensable and potentially dangerous to her own chosen replacement. Her court became a theater where she performed eternal youth and vitality, using makeup, wigs, and elaborate costumes to maintain the illusion. The cult of Gloriana reached its peak as poets, artists, and playwrights celebrated the Virgin Queen as a semi-divine figure married to England. She had successfully transformed what should have been her greatest weakness, remaining unmarried, into the defining strength of her reign. By the 1590s, it became clear that Elizabeth had won her dangerous game, establishing England as a major European power through diplomatic brilliance. Her refusal to marry had prevented England from becoming a satellite of any foreign power while maintaining independence and religious settlement. The price of this victory was enormous personal sacrifice, as she lived and died without the intimate companionship that marriage might have provided. Robert Dudley's death in 1588 marked the end of her last real chance for personal happiness, leaving her increasingly isolated in power. She surrounded herself with younger courtiers like the Earl of Essex, seeking the admiration and attention that had once come naturally. But these relationships were shadows of what might have been with Dudley, reminders of the human cost of her political choices. As the 16th century ended, Elizabeth had created a new model of female monarchy that would influence royal women for centuries. She proved that a woman could rule independently and successfully, without surrendering authority to a husband or male advisor. Her 45-year reign established England as a major naval power, defeated the Spanish Armada, and created the conditions for future empire. The Elizabethan age became synonymous with cultural flowering, as Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Spenser created works that defined English literature forever. When she died in 1603 at Richmond Palace, she had achieved something remarkable, dying as she had lived, on her own terms. Despite numerous courtships, she never married. Because of this, she is sometimes referred to as the Virgin Queen. Her greatest victory was transforming the marriage question from a source of weakness into an instrument of power and diplomatic leverage. She had played the deadliest game in European politics and won, leaving England stronger and more independent than she had found it. The Virgin Queenie's legacy was not just political but personal. She had redefined what it meant to be a woman in power. Elizabeth I proved that sometimes the most powerful choice is the one you refuse to make, and that independence could be its own form of strength. She remains history's greatest example of how to turn society's expectations into weapons and use what others saw as weakness as ultimate power.